Welcome to Industry Insights with Route Consultant, your front row seat to the fast-moving world of logistics and beyond. Each week, we bring you game-changing insights, real-world strategies, and fresh perspectives to fuel smarter investments and build stronger businesses. Join us as we sit down with expert guests to explore emerging trends and pressing topics across a wide range of industries. This is Industry Insights. Hey everyone, welcome to Industry Insights. This is a special episode that was actually recorded live at the Route Consultant Expo in 2026. We're releasing this over time so that if you weren't at the expo, or if you missed the session, or if you're just catching up, these are all coming out over the course of the year so that you can go back and watch this content and make sure that you see everything that we went over at the expo. Today we're going to hear from Leah Nelson and Stephen Rhein about the real financials that make or break a bread investment.
Well, welcome. Thank you so much for attending the 2026 Expo. I'm Leah Nelson. I am the Reporting and Research Director here at Route Consultant. So I've been here for quite a few years, and in my time here, I really worked on building the FedEx analysis department from the ground up, and by the time that was established, I moved on to analyzing our silos, which includes bread, which is of course what we're talking about today. In order to talk about bread, we've got Stephen here. He's a bread contractor, a really wealth of knowledge. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. For those who don't know me, my name is Stephen Rhein. I'm a business broker here at Route Consultant, but have a unique perspective. I have also been, there we go, can you hear me in the back? All right. I've also been a contractor for the last 20 years. So I jumped onto a bread truck right out of high school, began working for a contractor, eventually bought my first route. From there, scaled into a multi-truck operation, managing employees. So I'm excited to be here to share some of that experience with you and a few stories of things I've learned along the way.
All right, awesome. So the bread route space is generally considered a fairly straightforward business, and a lot of ways it is, which is great. But there are a couple of intricacies that you need to understand to be really successful in the space. Of course, the everyday is going to be operational, but in order to be really financially successful, it's going to be driven by a couple of kind of core decisions that you make around your territory knowledge and ordering and expense management and scale and all of those things. So we are going to talk about a handful of things today. We're going to start with how bread routes make money, so the gross revenue and the net revenue, which is the amount of money that you take home. We will then move on to, again, kind of that territory knowledge and how your product ordering will really impact your profit. And then we'll move on to expense management and control. And then finally, we are going to talk about valuations and why we use ratios instead of multiples, and how your structure of your business and your scale can really impact your long-term value. So what we want today is basically to give you a really practical framework of deciding if bread routes are either a good investment for you if you're not in the space, or making some really intentional decisions for your business if you are already in the space. So with revenue in the bread space can appear a little bit complicated at first, but once you break it down, it's actually quite simple. So as a bread contractor, of course, you're doing all of your own ordering, and doing your own ordering, that means you're in charge of your own revenue, which of course has its pros and cons, being in charge of your own revenue, but we're gonna start with basically the foundation here. So there are two facets of revenue in the bread space. The first one's gonna be your gross revenue. So this is the physical amount of dollars that your bread is sold for in the store. So let's say a loaf of bread is $5, you sell 20 loaves of bread, that's $100 that you have made in gross revenue. So on basically kind of a week-to-week basis, your gross revenue should be relatively predictable. In most cases, you're gonna be selling similar amounts of products, every week. But having a really intimate knowledge of your stores is going to be really important. Again, you're in charge of your own ordering, so you have to know what the shelves need and at what time. If you have too much product on your shelves, you are going to have full shelves, things are expiring on your shelves. Pretty much all bakeries have what is called a stale allowance, which means that they know a certain amount of your product is going to go bad. That's okay, a certain amount is allowed to, but if you have way too much product and too much is expiring, you're gonna not only kind of damage your relationship with the bakery, but you're also gonna just lose a lot of money. Never good. And if you don't have enough product on your shelves, your customers, all the clients coming into the stores, they're gonna be like, why are there so many empty shelves? And they're not gonna be very happy about that. And then your clients, the owners of the stores, aren't gonna be happy, and you're gonna make less money in that regard as well.
Yeah, so if you're looking at buying a business, you really need to not just take revenue at face value. It's important to dig into the numbers. And the way we do this is through a 52-week historical sales sheet. This is going to break down details that show the number of stops on the route. It's going to show different product portfolios. So in many cases, there could be 5 or 6 different categories of product that you'll be distributing locally to the stores. And then beyond that, you really want to look at the number of SKUs that you'll be handling. Many grocery stores have as many as 50,000 SKUs. In the grocery space, there are lots. So specifically on the bread route that you're buying, how many SKUs are you going to be handling and managing in each individual store? Another consideration is cost per unit. So thinking about how that affects your margin and how much work you're going to have to do to actually make a decent income.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before, having a really intimate knowledge of your territory is going to be crucial to maximizing your sales. Of course, there are going to be, national events and holidays that are going to impact your sales patterns. You are going to order more rolls for Thanksgiving and Christmas. You're going to order more hot dog and hamburger buns for the 4th of July. Everyone's going to have those things. But it's also really, really important to know the specific events that are happening in your specific territory that is going to impact your ordering. So just as a really kind of small example, there's a music festival pretty close to here that brings 100,000 people to Manchester, Tennessee every year. So those retailers in that area around that festival, they're going to order a lot more bread that week in the summer because they know 100,000 campers want to stock up on some non-perishable items before they go to the festival. I know this. I go every year and I stock up on bread at the local Walmart by the festival. But that's just a really small example of just how knowing your territory and knowing the specific events that are happening near you will impact your ordering, whether you need to order more for the campers or maybe something is taking people away from your territory. You need to order less for that week so you don't have too much stale.
Yeah, so thinking about the inventory management, how that product rolls, we like to say that the core competency of any bread owner comes down to having the right product in the right store at the right time. So thinking about the regional impacts, Bonnaroo being an example, the current owner that has that Manchester, Tennessee area knows that he has to forecast when Bonnaroo happens for a huge influx in consumers. So that's can be multiplied out across the country. I'm sure there are regional impacts. So adjusting orders is really critical. You need to give the bakery enough time to know how much raw ingredients to order and have on hand to actually bake. And so how they do that is through order forecasting. You may place an order 2 weeks in advance, and then from that adjust it as you get closer to the actually bake cycles. So that could be adjusting an order 5 days before the actual delivery date. Best practices there would be to adjust the order weekly, but if you really want to get honed in, it's almost daily. So order mix, when we think about the grocery business, 60% of your weekly sales are going to come on the weekend. We know Friday is the #1 online shopping day of the week. It's payday. People put in a Kroger order, a Walmart order, and they pick it up. Sunday is the #1 foot trafficked day of the week in the actual retailers. So we need to be prepared for that in a fresh bakery business. We don't want to order 80% of our weekly volume on a Monday and Tuesday in an effort to make our week much easier. We want to think like a consumer would and have fresh product in the stores toward the weekend. I'll give you a couple examples here. When I first bought a route, I think it was my first cycle through the promotional calendar on the year. So we were coming up on 4th of July. I was super excited, built a bunch of displays. I had product everywhere. And wouldn't you know it, it rained for 3 days straight. No one went to the lake, no one grilled out. And what I learned from that was I had all this product on hand that had maybe a week's shelf life. But I also had lots of orders coming behind me to refill those displays, expecting the sell-through. And when that didn't happen, if I didn't adjust those orders that were coming in, I was going to be way over my stale allowance. I was going to have some chargebacks. So that's really important. And I'll give you another example that is kind of the inverse of that. In the South, when it snows, people go crazy. They buy all the bread in the shelf. I'm sure we've seen this before. I wasn't prepared. We had a big ice storm. I can remember in watching the news, I think in Atlanta, there were trucks just sliding down a hill after ice. And so what I learned from that was I really need to be prepared on the front end and have lots of product and not so much directly after that event. So when I wasn't prepared, I started seeing my shelves getting wiped out. I ordered lots of product for my next order, but what I didn't think about was my truck wasn't going to be able to get out. It was sitting, I couldn't get it out, it wasn't safe, and all the extra product I ordered was sitting in a warehouse going out of date. So that's another example of being on the right side of the sales is really important if you're going to hit your KPIs.
All right, so that's a lot about gross revenue. So now we're going to move on to our net revenue. So net revenue is often called discount or commission as well. And so your net revenue is going to be how much money you physically take home as the owner. So that's going to be all of your expenses are going to be paid out of your net revenue. So your net revenue, just for an example here, that $100 of gross bread that we sold earlier, those 20 loaves that we sold for $100, let's say you have a 20% either discount or commission rate. Again, those terms kind of change up. You would earn $20 in net revenue. So you would take home $20 from that bread that was sold. So your net revenue can vary by the bakery that you work for, as well as the products that you're selling. So whether you work for Flowers or Pepperidge or Bimbo, you'll have different commission rates. And if within your own bakery, whether you're selling white bread or organic bread or rolls, those are also going to have different commission rates. So each product itself is going to be a little bit different. So that being said, you would think you would want to put all of your focus and all of your marketing efforts on your highest commission bread. But that is not always necessarily the case. So, in some bakeries, white bread has a much higher commission rate than, say, organic bread. So you think, oh man, I want to put all of my kind of effort into selling white bread. But you also have to consider the price point of the business, or the bread, the price point that the bread is selling for. So let's say the white bread, that 20% commission, it sells at $2 per loaf, you're making 40 cents per loaf. But organic bread, it's got a 15% commission, which is lower, so you're like, a little bit lower, but it sells at $4 per loaf, so you're making 60% for each loaf of organic bread that you sell. So again, intuitively, you want to say, I want to sell my higher commission rate products. But in that case, you're actually making more money on each loaf of organic bread that you sell, so you actually want to put your effort into selling those products.
Yeah, so again, going back to our 52-week sheets, analyzing the data and understanding what is selling in our markets and knowing what categories of products are really winning with consumers. So aligning our expectations with the demographics of the territory is really critical. Thinking beyond the set, there could be maybe 100 different SKUs of products that you could order, but maybe only 50 of those are actually offered in the Walmart store. So what products do you have that you could sell to win incremental business that isn't currently available in the store? I can remember one time we owned a tortilla route in a Hispanic area. There were lots of tiendas, little taco shops, and the only thing I could offer a customer was a small 10-count street taco option. But I also had a bulk 60-count food service product. So I knew that was available. I knew that there was a demand for the product. And I knew what the retailer's margin was. This is one thing I don't think most people really consider when they're trying to sell or upsell a grocery manager is how much money is the grocery store actually going to make on this? So in this case, it was, I think, a 34% margin, which is really good. And so I went to the grocery manager, I positioned the product, I said it's in high demand, I believe it'll do really well, it's a great margin, and we were able to leverage that knowledge by getting a display of something that was not naturally in their set. So Walmart looks at regional sell-through, but they never look at it on a micro level. And so that's where knowing your territory, being really specific, will set you apart from the good distributors into the great category.
So there's a lot about revenue. So we are now going to move on to expenses, which is also incredibly important. So one of the really good things about the bread space is that expenses are relatively simple. You just don't have a whole lot of moving pieces, which can be really great. You have to worry about really a handful of things. So you've got your fuel, your insurance, repair and maintenance, a couple admin fees, and an employee if you want one. So starting with fuel, this is going to be pretty simple. Again, it's only really going to fluctuate if the fuel prices in your area are fluctuating. So every week, you're really going to be traveling the same path between your stores, going to be doing the same amount of miles. So your fuel price will go up and down just a little bit depending on the price per gallon in your area. Now, the really good thing about the bread space is that a lot of the territories are pretty condensed, so they're pretty small and close together. So you're not going to have really astronomical fuel costs like you might in some other industries. That's not to say that there aren't certain routes that the stops are really far apart or they're really far from the bakery, but as a pretty general rule, it's going to be a pretty condensed area for you.
Yeah, so thinking about bread routes, this is really where they shine against other traditional logistics operations. Understanding the contract terms of the route that you buy is really important because it's going to dictate the things that you can and can't do when it comes to a service schedule. Now, some stores require 5 deliveries per week, and that's actually written into the contract. So that's going to prevent you from using the hybrid models I'm going to talk about a little bit later. Now, if that's not specified, there are a lot of opportunities for you to utilize a hybrid model. So if we're trying to minimize our expenses, thinking that our truck is our most valuable asset, it's the most expensive piece of equipment that we operate, how can we utilize it more efficiently and maybe use a smaller Honda Civic with a merchandiser that comes behind us to work the product so that our equipment is not sitting behind Walmart for 3 hours while we're stocking shelves. So that's where a hybrid model can really work. Again, this is very territory specific. So understand your stores, understand how you can do this, and think a little bit outside the box as you're evaluating an operation.
So moving on to the next expense is going to be your truck expenses. So truck insurance is certainly an important expense. It's going to vary depending on the type of truck that you are driving, as well as your safety record. So the safer you are, the cheaper your truck insurance. But either way, this is going to be a fixed expense. You know what it's going to be every single month. It's going to be pretty easy to plan for. Also, with truck expenses, if you do have a multi-route operation, you can really benefit from economies of scale with this one and get some discounts for having multiple trucks on your insurance policy. With repairs and maintenance, this is going to be your most variable expense in most cases. Of course, no matter what kind of vehicle you drive, you're always going to have standard maintenance, so your brakes, oil changes, all of those things. If you have an older vehicle, of course, you may want to plan for some larger repairs, some more frequent breakdowns, engines, transmissions, all of those things. But the good thing about the bread space is that most bakeries don't monitor or dictate the type of truck that you use. So you've got a lot of free will in the vehicle that you choose to deliver your bread with. So, some people choose a standard delivery vehicle. Some people choose to have a trailer hooked up to a pickup truck. So with your repair and maintenance, again, it can be pretty variable, but the reason why it can be variable is because you've got a lot of choice, which is always helpful.
Yeah, when we're thinking about vehicles, it's important to know that when we say bread routes, that might encompass several different categories. You could have cookie and cracker routes. The nature of these products, you have a very long shelf life. The product is very small. And in some cases, the product can be very expensive. So those cookie routes can be really on the premium side of the business. That allows you to be very versatile in the equipment that you use. I have a friend not too far from here, runs a cookie route. He's able to get it done with just a cargo van. Has kind of a hybrid model I talked about earlier. He goes into the stores the day before, pre-writes his order, leaves all of his inventory in the warehouse, picks it there, loads it in the van, and is ready to go the next morning. That's something you can't really do in the bread business, but gives you some flexibility depending on the product that you're selling. Another example is a tortilla route. Complete opposite of that. Product is heavy, very dense, typically loaded on pallets, can be very heavy. So we've personally experienced this in our operation where we had to utilize a 26-foot box truck. We had to use a lift gate, and we would drop about 8,000 pounds of tortillas at Walmart every Friday. So utilizing that equipment, we were able to be much more efficient and not work ourselves into a backache. And then, of course, bread routes. These are your more traditional options. Box truck, Isuzu NPR, 18 to 20 foot. You can also use a pickup truck and a cargo trailer if you decide to do that.
So beyond kind of those expenses, some of your other necessary ones are going to be admin fees, warehouse fees, some miscellaneous fees. These are going to vary depending on the bakery that you use and some of the software that you choose to use. These are all going to be really small expenses. You don't really have to worry about them a whole lot. Most of them are fixed. And again, they're going to be really small. The big optional expense that you have is going to be an employee and its wages and the things that go with wages. So many route owners nowadays, and particularly if they're running a single route, choose to do an owner-operator model where the owner is running the route themselves. So a lot of them don't have a driver. However, you can choose to have a driver if you want to, which is the benefit of the bread space. You can choose to have a full-time driver or somebody who works 2 or 3 days per week while you work a day or two per week. You can have someone come and do, pull-ups on your days off. there are lots of ways that you can structure having an employee with your business. One thing I do want to say is that not all bread routes can financially support having an employee or a full-time employee. So that's one thing if you're either analyzing a bread route or trying to decide if you want to add an employee, you do want to make sure that your route makes enough money to do that. Again, some of them don't, a lot of them do. It kind of depends on the structure that you have, but you do want to make sure that it can financially support it before you make that decision.
Yeah, so thinking about growth trajectories, starting as an owner-operator and maybe moving to employees, it's important to consider how maybe you could transition from that owner-operator model to having an employee. So the growth track here really, in my opinion, is starting as an owner-operator, growing yourself out of a job, bringing on a part-time employee to help you bridge that gap between being too big for one, but not quite big enough for two. And from there, you can split a route into 2 trucks and then move into the administrative owner. This is going to be someone that is managing vacation schedules, making sure the equipment is taken care of, managing call-outs, working with grocery managers to build displays as necessary. And then from there, scaling to a manager. When you hit the 5 to 6 route mark, that's usually where you can support a manager. And remember, in every step, you're trying to duplicate yourself and work yourself out of a job. This is a very repeatable business. You do the same thing just about every day. And so it's very ripe for structures. And if you're someone that can put that in place, you can grow and scale really easily.
Hey guys, we just wanted to pause for a moment to invite you to our free events that are happening throughout the year. Whether you're just getting started in the logistics industry or you're looking to optimize your current operation, Route Consultant has events that are designed specifically for you. So head on over to routeconsultant.com/events or check out our show notes to register for free today. Also, while you're here, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Industry Insights with Route Consultant podcast so that you don't miss out on the stories, the advice, and the updates that are happening throughout the industry. We appreciate you being here and hope to meet you in person soon. Now let's get back to the episode.
So all that being said, let's talk about revenue, expenses. How much money will you make owning a bread business? So on average, a bread route typically has a net income between 70 and 90% of its net revenue. That's the net revenue, not the gross revenue, something to keep in mind. And that is if it's an owner-operator model, so that number does not include an employee. If you do want an employee, we do typically see that net income drop to around 20 to 50% of net revenue. So those are going to be your kind of standard metrics there.
Yeah, so I wanted to give an example of a profit and loss sheet. I wanted to give a conservative example. So there are lots of routes that are larger than this, but just to give you an idea. So on this example, there's $647,000 in gross revenue. Net sales or the commission on that is going to be $106,000. So that's 16.5%. Your expenses, of course, there are only a few, totaling about $20,000 a year in expenses, which leaves you with an EBITDA number of $86,368. One important distinction between over the haul, line haul, and the grocery business is cost of goods sold. So the difference there between your gross revenue and your net revenue is the cost of the product that you have to buy to then resell to the customer.
So putting some numbers to that, kind of like Stephen mentioned with the P&L there, we're looking at around $70,000 to $120,000 is what an average bread route earns in a year. Again, this is assuming an owner-operator model. If you do want to have an employee, you would subtract the wages out of that average. And also, these are averages. I've seen routes that are much less than this at around $30,000 in net income. I've seen some that are much higher at around $150,000 or more in net income. But if you're looking at evaluating a bread route, this is going to be a really good benchmark for what a standard one is going to look like. Again, does not include employee wages. This number also does not include any debt payments. So if you're paying on your route or you're paying on your truck, it would also be coming out of that average net income number.
Yeah, so I wanted to compare the bread routes to maybe a couple different businesses that you could invest in if you wanted to. I had the opportunity probably 4 years ago to help a friend launch a home services franchise. This is while I had bread routes, and I was really unfamiliar with the franchise world. And what I found was he had fantastic margins. I think he averaged 38 to 42% gross margins, which is about double what I was operating in the bread business. But what I didn't consider was he had royalties. He had to pay 5.5% right off the top back to the home company for doing business with them. He also had to pay into a national marketing budget. That was regardless of whether he actually sold product or not. He was required to pay a national marketing budget to help support the brand. He also had competition. While he did own a territory, there were other people that were competing with that business, offering the same product and service for him. So he had no guarantee of sales. If you contrast that with the grocery business or bread routes, you do have lower operating margins, 18 to 20% on average, but you also have very low expenses. You don't have to pay a marketing budget. There are no royalties back to the company. And your population base, the people that buy bread on a weekly basis, you never have to go out and find them. The grocery industry is very stable, so you can predict and expect income on a weekly basis. If you get up, go to work, do a good job, that paycheck's going to be there on Friday. And so as you're considering your options, whether it's FedEx, Amazon, bread routes, or the franchise world, think about your strengths and goals and consider both of them, and you'll find a good answer.
So looking at valuations in the bread industry, we do evaluate bread routes a little bit differently than businesses in other industries. So in other industries, a lot of them use what's called a multiple, which is calculated by taking the price of the business and dividing it by the net income of the business. In bread, we use what's called a ratio. We'll still use the term multiple sometimes, but in bread, it's a little bit different. It's also called a ratio, and it operates very similarly to a multiple, but it's calculated a little bit differently. So it's calculated by taking the price and dividing it by the gross weekly revenue of the bread route. So for an example, if you have a $200,000 route and it earns $20,000 in gross weekly revenue, that is a 10 times ratio. But ratios, just like multiples in other industries, can vary depending on other factors. So businesses can have a higher ratio or a lower ratio, be more valuable or less valuable, depending on a number of things. And that includes location, the bakery you work for, and whether the route is corporately or privately operated. So starting with location, this one's fairly straightforward. Some states and cities are just more desirable than others. People want to live there and work there or vacation there, so those states and cities become more valuable than maybe some other areas where routes are. The next is going to be the bakery that you work for. So some bakeries are a little bit more valuable than others. They're a little bit more sought out. For example, Pepperidge is one that's just really kind of considered cream of the crop. There's not quite as many out there, and they sell for higher than some other routes. And even beyond that, Pepperidge Farm snack routes are like even more valuable than their bread routes. They sell for a little bit higher. So the product mix can also make a little bit of difference in your value as well. It can drive it up or down. And then beyond that, whether the route is corporately or privately owned can also make a difference. So if it's a corporate route, which basically means the bakery themselves are physically running the route, they are not owned by an individual person, they're being run by the bakery, those tend to sell for a little bit less. So those tend to sell for between a 4 and a 10 times ratio. With the privately owned routes, that's going to be, if you were to buy a route, you would be a private owner. They're run by an individual and they are contracted with the bakeries. Those are going to sell for a little bit more. So those are typically listed around a 7 to a 28 times ratio. I know that's a pretty big range, but again, there are several other factors that go into it beyond just being privately operated. And then lastly on that, just another quick note is if a truck is included or not. With corporate routes, you never see trucks. I've never seen a truck with a corporate route. But with privately owned routes, it's not uncommon for a truck to be included so it can bring that ratio up, or a truck to be included for like an additional fee beyond the route.
Yeah, so thinking about route multiples, it's important to consider that the fair market is always going to be dictated by what a seller is willing to accept and what a buyer is willing to accept and what a seller is willing to offer. And so why do we use sales, a multiple of sales versus a multiple of profits? I wanted to highlight 2 examples here. Both routes on paper look very similar. The one on the left, we're going to say, is in the rural Midwest. It's probably cold. I've been on a bread truck at 3 in the morning when it's very cold, and it's not pleasant. It feels like a freezer. 40 stops is a lot. 800 miles is a lot. You spend a lot of time in that truck. The other route, let's say, is in Southwest Florida. Only 3 stops, 60 miles. You have great weather. It's a very attractive place to live. And so while both of these routes on paper look the same, they're distinctly different. And so the value of the Route 2 is going to be much more valuable in the open market than Route 1.
So we talked a lot about basically single routes. So everything we talked about, we kind of referenced single route operations, but what happens when you want to own multiple routes? So multi-route operations can give you as the owner a little bit more of a hands-off experience up to a certain extent. Many multi-route owners still tend to have their hands in the business, but they're not on a truck every single day. They're not delivering the bread every morning at 3 a.m. when it's cold. One of the advantages of having multiple routes, we kind of mentioned employees earlier, but when you have multiple routes, you have to have employees. You are required to have employees. There are many ways that you can structure their responsibilities, but pretty much always your employees are going to certainly be delivering the bread every single day. And they are also going to be assisting you with the ordering. So you as the owner may still physically be clicking the buttons to do the ordering, but you are relying on intel from your drivers. They're the ones who have that intimate knowledge of their stores. They know what needs to be on the shelves, and they are going to be, providing you with that information and telling you what they need for their own stores. Also, kind of, Stephen mentioned this earlier, once you have enough routes, you can often add a supervisor or a manager if you want to. They can take over that ordering themselves. They can monitor your drivers. They can get on a truck if they need to. So you get the advantage of having a supervisor. So there are a couple of things you need to financially consider if you are planning on being a multi-route operator as well. Number one, being your employee pay. Making sure that the structure of the pay makes sense for your business and your goals. So there are, again, a lot of ways that you can structure your employee pay. But a really common way that multi-route owners do that is by having a base pay plus a commission. Having that commission inspires the drivers to really care about their route, to take care of their route, and to want to grow their route, because the bigger their route is, the more money that they make as drivers. So that can be a really common structure. As well, you want to make sure your pay structures make sense, again, for the financials of your route. You want to make sure that the routes that you have combined, the multiple routes that you have combined together, can financially support your staff and what you want to pay your staff. So before you start willy-nilly just saying, I want to combine all these random routes together, make sure that they can financially support the staff and the structure that you want to support your staff. Beyond that, with your employees as well, certain states, not all of them, but a lot of states, once you reach a certain number of employees, you are required to have workers' compensation insurance. So with a single route, you typically don't have to have that. It's not typically a requirement, and a lot of bread route owners don't pay it if they're the one employee or the one person on the route. But if you have, like in some states, say over 5 employees or whatever the number is, that is an additional expense that you would have to add. So you do need to consider that as well. Beyond that, just a couple of other expenses. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, you can see some savings with truck insurance for having multiple trucks on your insurance policy. You can get some savings there, as well as repair and maintenance. Typically, if you've got one shop that you work with and you start taking a whole fleet of trucks to them, they're going to offer you some discounts there too, which can be awesome. But beyond that, looking at your net revenue, kind of the bare minimum net revenue we want to see to have your route sustain is going to be $2,200. If you've got kind of those multiple routes, if each route is earning $2,200 on a weekly basis, you can sustain the expenses. You can pay for your expenses. In an optimal world, you are earning more than $2,200 in net revenue per week, so your route can thrive and you can take home all of the money. But again, to sustain your route and to survive, we want each of those routes to earn $2,200 in net revenue so you can afford all of your expenses.
Yeah, so thinking about profitability and scale, this is really where you can start getting a pretty big operation. Remembering stocking shelves is easy. Managing the inventory is the core competency of any owner. We're moving into a digital age where even just 5 years ago, the availability of data, shelf conditions, in stocks, out of dates, could be readily available to you at a laptop 50 miles away. So as you're considering, growing, if you want to remain an owner-operator, you can. You can sell off any growth that you have and remain one truck. But if you want to grow and scale, put a second truck on board, you certainly can do that. So thinking about a return on investment, if you could make $25,000 on one route that maybe you purchased for $100 all in, you're making a 25% return. So if you were to scale that to 10, it's looking pretty exciting. But if you want to stay conservative and just have one or two, there is flexibility there that you have on the bread side that you don't on the FedEx operations.
All right, so I know we talked about quite a bit today. I gave you a good general overview, revenue, expenses, scaling, all of those things. I'm sure we've got a mix of people in this room, of people who are thinking about investing in bread routes. So if you're thinking about it and you've got a route that you're looking at, and you want us to take a look and help you decide if it's a good investment for you, we can absolutely help with that. If you are already a bread contractor and you want some help deciding if your route can be more profitable and ways that you can improve your route, we are here to help with that as well. But in the meantime, looks like we're going to open it up for some Q&A if we've got any.
Make sure you hold it.
Good evening. So I had two questions for you. You talked about margins and variability depending on product. If you could give like sort of a macro level of your product mix in terms of, I know you probably have multiple routes, but what would that look like outside of regional specificity? And when you think about like longer shelf life items, cookies, crackers, do you think warehousing is beneficial so you can sort of stock at a large bulk and work as your own distro inside your own market? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. To your first question, your blended average, the margin is going to be different on each route. You have to look at the products that your stores are selling, whether you have institutional customers there that are driving down your margin, or you're in an area like Washington, D.C., healthy area, buys a lot of organic bread. The blended margin there is very, very high because that's the core product that they buy. You get into a more rural area where it's mostly private label business, that's going to drive down your margin. So 18 to 21% is a good average. And to your question about warehousing, you can, to an extent, thinking about potentially product cuts, it's always wise if you have a 6-month shelf life to maybe warehouse 3 weeks worth of product, but you're not going to want to really go out beyond that because you're just not going to have the right product. Good question. Let's do it.
Thanks. Hey, I was wondering about the inventory mix. That in the two forums that I've been in, that hasn't been explained, I guess, as clearly as I expect. What does ordering look like? You said touch it daily is a good margin to have. Can you explain a little bit more of what the inventory management looks like? Thanks.
Yeah, great question. Thinking about the digital age, the availability of data, you can go into Walmart's system if you're there and ask a manager to show what the sell-through is, almost down to the hour. They will show you what they have on hand. They'll show you how many units they're selling per day, and they'll even break it down by the hour. So taking all that data in is tough. We have an ordering system that will help us with forecasting. It'll show, last week I ordered 100 loaves of this product and I returned 20. That's a pretty healthy ratio there. But there's a lot of data that will help you with that. And starting with that 52-week sheet that I mentioned will help you evaluate if this is a business that you want to buy. And then from there, you can get even further into it from the actual retailer's numbers. Does that answer your question?
Hello, my name is Wanda Curry. First of all, the information was wonderful. Thank you so much. I don't know if you could go back on a couple slides. The first one talked about it was with the revenue where you had the $100. It was back kind of near the front. You had the $100 times the 20% commission. I think you just go back that way. Right there.
This one? Yeah.
Okay, so that 20%, that represented what went to the owner, is that correct?
That is correct, yes. That 20% would be what you take home.
So you take that before you take out the expenses, right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so now can you go to the profit and loss page?
We had a lot of slides, yeah.
So that net sales that's on there, does that represent the same number?
That's right, yeah. So we'll kind of interchange. There's a lot of interchanging terms. There's net revenue, net sales, discount, or commission are all basically the same term, but they all represent that number that you are taking home.
Okay, so that shows what the owner would take home before the expenses are taken out.
That's right. And then your net
And then you
income is
still-
going to be after your expenses, what
Yes.
you are taking home as an owner. Yeah.
Okay, and then so there's still revenue at the bottom. I think that's a good, you guys, that's an excellent slide. I just want to make sure I understood it and make sure that other people saw that too. Thank you.
Hey, quick question. So what happens to the bread that goes stale?
Could you speak a little louder?
Okay. So question is, what happens to the bread that gets damaged on the shelf at the store? Are you responsible for it, or is the store responsible for it?
Good question. It depends on how it's damaged. I had a situation a few years ago where there was a mice infestation and product was getting chewed up. I was not charged for that. In fact, I was actually paid on it. Walmart scanned it through the register, wrote it off, and I got paid. Now, if it falls on the floor and someone steps on it, you can damage that off, take it back to the warehouse, they'll give you credit for it. So it depends on how it's damaged. Good question.
Yeah.
A follow-up question to that. What if, for stolen items, right? It happens a lot in the large stores, and you put 100 in, Walmart scan 80, you get there, but it's only 15 remaining. Who bears that cost?
You're talking about shrink?
Yes.
Yeah. The distributor is responsible for shrink up to a certain point. If you are missing that many units, it's likely because the distributor keyed a wrong number. You know, someone took out a stack of product that they weren't supposed to. But yes, that could be a big deal. So keeping on top of shrink is really important.
Okay. The other question I had was, so the manufacturer only takes 5% of the product back, right? If you have excess inventory that you ordered, what do you do with the rest, right? Again, I heard somebody say that you can actually donate it, right? But what other options are there?
Yeah, it varies by the bakery. You need to make sure you read the contract and understand what the terms are for the returns to actually sell it back to the bakeries or have them buy it back. So I'd point you to the contract there. If you're buying the product, like with the tortilla business, you know, there were no returns in that for me. So we did donate most of our stale there.
Go ahead. Okay. Just quick question. As you're evaluating routes, do you have a formula or a mix where obviously I'm in both Toledo and Cincinnati. So routes that have larger grocery stores, the big box, the Kroger's, Walmart's, things of that nature. Is there a good mix then with the number of stops with smaller mom and pops? Or do you have some sort of formula as you evaluate the routes?
Good question. I think in general, the more big box stores you have and the fewer mom and pops, the more valuable the business. The less stops you have, the more volume you can do out of a smaller number is better. Now, with that said, the big box stores are certainly harder to work with than the mom and pops. One of my favorite stops on my route was an independently owned grocer. They treated us like family. They were integrated into the community in a way that, you know, the big box wasn't. So it depends on your goals. It depends on what you're after as an investor. Just really dig into the data and make sure you understand it.
Hello. Quick question. When the administration fees and the warehouse fees, are those things that are taken out by the bakery?
They can be, yeah. It depends on the bakery that you work for. So some will have like mandatory fees in that regard where you have to pay them. Other bakeries don't, or they vary depending on the bakery. This can be kind of just like a standard range for your warehouse or admin fees. Again, they may go up or down a little bit depending on who you work for. Sometimes they are mandatory.
Thank you. I have another question about the DOT number. I know typically in like trucking, different companies you want to contract with or buy into, they require an aged DOT, like you want to be in business, operating that authority for like a year, sometimes longer, depending upon where. Does it matter for bread companies? Because I've heard that you had to operate under your own individual DOT.
I have not heard that you need an aged DOT. I've seen deals get done with fresh DOTs. And just to go back to the warehouse real quick, each bakery is different. There are some that don't charge a warehouse fee. There are some that let you rent a storage unit and actually run product out of it from there. And so then you would actually pay for that unit rather than having it deducted from a settlement.
Can you talk about like the timeline of the route acquisition from, I don't know, getting maybe in-house financing to actually starting like with the training and everything?
I think
how long can we expect from start to finish to actually getting in?
If you already have an entity formed, I'd say 8 to 10 weeks is reasonable. Also depends on the state you're in and how quickly they can process applications. Depends on the structure that you're setting up with, if you already have a vehicle in place. I think 8 to 10 weeks is a good timeline.
You said that you also donate some of the stales. Is that something you write off on your taxes at the end of the year?
If it was a billing model where you actually purchased the product and there was no stale credit at all, I believe you could possibly do that. Check with your CPA. I'm not an accountant, so just want to clarify that.
I'm sorry, I'm a little lost. I do want to go into the bread industry, but I'm just trying to figure out, maybe I missed something, do we purchase the bread first?
Yeah, the way billing is done is on a consignment model, so you're not required in the P&L case to show up at the warehouse with a $12,000 check. So you have an account with the bakery. When you order the product, you're billed for that. And when it is sold into the retailers, whether it's through a chain account or an SBT payment system, that's how your account gets credited. And then you'll have a positive balance as long as you sell through all the product.
Do you all have, I know on the Route Consultant, they have one-on-one classes that I did see on there, which is really good information, but do you all have any workshops to learn more?
Yeah, we can absolutely help you. Find us after. I'll give you some resources to learn further.